Hey, welcome back to Everyday Craftsman. Today we are talking bandsaw safety. If there was one tool that I could have in my shop, only one saw, it would be a bandsaw. And the reason is these are incredibly versatile saws. They can do rip cuts with the grain, they can do cross cuts across the grain, they can do curved cuts, they can resaw. You can do a variety of things with this one saw. So let's dig in, let's check it out, and let's see how you use these tools safely. So before we get too far into safety, let's talk about what a bandsaw is. So a bandsaw is basically a circular blade that's going to travel around an upper wheel and around a lower wheel. And this lower wheel is attached to a belt that's attached to the motor, and that's going to be what spins these, bringing the blade down through the material. So coming down off the upper wheel, the blade is going to travel down through the guard. The guard is adjustable up and down. We'll talk about that later. It's going to travel down through a series of bearings. There's one bearing here that's going to keep the blade from moving forwards and backwards, and there are two bearings here that are going to help it track. It's then going to move down through a series of bearings that look just like this underneath the table, and then travel back up the wheel to the upper part and revolve that way. Bandsaws also have a nice flat table. This is incredibly important for keeping your material flat and safe. Most of them are also going to be equipped with a miter gauge track so that you can put jigs in there and things of that nature. And often they are equipped with a fence as well so that you can make clean, repeatable cuts that way. Over here on the neck of the machine is where your on-off switch is going to be. I have the machine turned off right now, but most of these are going to be a push button style, so push it on, push it off. Okay, so looking at the back of the machine here, this knob here is one that you're not going to touch very often. This is going to change the angle of the wheel, so it's helpful sometimes when you're trying to take a blade off or put a blade on, but you want to make sure that it is locked in place when you go to the cut because you don't want that wheel moving. The blade can pop off. Above that, we have our tension rod, which is going to keep our blade tensioned. We want to make sure that our blade is tensioned properly, or else it's going to wander in the cut and we're not going to get a nice clean cut. So you move this up and down, you adjust it based on the width of your blade. So right now we've got a 1/4 inch blade in there, so we're going to adjust this to a 1/4 inch. You're going to want to check that before you start any cuts. Make sure that your blade is properly tensioned. Also, some are equipped with this quick tension release. That's going to release the blade so that it is movable in there, and then you can retension it quickly. Okay, so let's talk about the blade itself. Blades come in a variety of different widths. So the width of your blade determines directly how tight of a curve you can cut or how straight of a cut you're going to get. So the thinner the blade or the smaller the blade, the tighter radius curve I can make, because it's not, the back of the blade is not going to get caught in the curve as much. But it's also going to be more difficult to get a straight cut. The wider the blade, the straighter cut you can make. So you kind of have to decide what you're trying to do and put a different blade on for the different jobs that you're trying to do. A couple of other things that you're going to find on some of these larger bandsaws are going to be wider blades. So really, this bandsaw has a 1-inch blade. It is designed more for resawing and for making straight cuts than curved cuts. In fact, I really couldn't make too many curved cuts on this, but I can get nice, clean, straight cuts on it. 1, 2, 3. So a larger bandsaw like this with a larger blade, this happens to have a 1-inch blade on it. It's going to be designed for milling lumber or for resawing and things of that nature. So I'm not going to try to cut intricate curves on this, but I am going to be able to make some nice clean cuts on here. Now, a couple of features on a larger bandsaw that you'll find. Over here on the neck, we find a little bit different style on-off switch. So this one has a safety on it, this red button. This is actually the stop button, but it has to be pulled out to be able to turn the saw on. If it's pushed in, the saw won't turn on. So pull it out, that's just a nice built-in safety feature. Turn the saw on. Hit it to turn it off. These also come with a brake that you can step on that stops the blade quickly so that you don't have to stand here and wait for this long blade to stop moving. Next, we got to talk about safety equipment. So PPE. You need to wear safety goggles while operating a bandsaw. Just like any other tool, you want to protect your eyes. You also want to make sure that your sleeves are rolled up, that your hair, if it's longer than shoulder length, it's tucked in, and that you don't have any danglers to get caught in this blade as it's moving around. Other than that, I think we're ready to start looking at how to cut. Let's get to it. Okay, so we are ready to start getting into how to properly cut, how to safely cut. So let's zoom in and take a look at the blade. When we are ready to cut, we want to set our blade height properly. If the blade height is too high, it's going to give more opportunity for my fingers to run into that blade and be flopping around on the table. We don't want that. So what we want to do is set the blade to about 1/8 to 1/4 inch above our stock. Okay, now I'm not going to measure that. You can eyeball it. I generally put my finger there and just drop it down onto my fingernail, and that tells me that I'm about where I need to be for setup. Also, we never want to have our fingers within 2 inches of the blade. Sometimes when you're cutting, you're going to have some sort of weird grain or something, and as it's cutting, it's going to be difficult. You're going to push a little harder, and then it slips through, and boom, then your finger goes into the blade, and that's bad. So we want to keep our fingers out of the track of the blade, out from in front of the blade, and we want to keep them about 2 inches away. If you need something to help support it, a push stick is a great idea, especially a push stick with a notch here, so that I can easily maneuver in here, and if it slips, I don't really care if the push stick gets cut. I'd rather the push stick get cut than my fingers. Okay, so we want to cut material that is flat on the bottom. We don't want to cut things that are going to rock all over the place because it's going to cause the blade to bind. Same thing here. When you cut circular stock, something that is round or cylindrical, you need to use what's called a V-block. This is going to hold the material in there while you cut through it. Otherwise, it's going to roll on you and twist the blade up. A few years ago, one of my students was cutting this log on our Powermatic 24, and she didn't use a V-block, and that is what happened to the blade. The blade caught in it and rolled the log down, and it just ripped the blade right out. Luckily, she didn't get injured, but she could have gotten injured very easily. It could have pulled her hand in, it could have crushed her hand, the blade could have come flying off. So always use a V-block so that you don't have an injury like this. Okay, now to make this curved cut here, we're going to turn the machine on and let it come to full speed. Okay, so keeping my fingers out of the track of the blade and making sure that I'm not within 2 inches, I'm going to start that cut. Anticipate your corner so that you can begin that cut before you need to. Okay, let's say that I got off track with this cut and I needed to start over. I needed to redo it. You're not supposed to back out of a cut. And the reason being, especially on a curved cut like this, if I try to back out of this cut and I catch that blade, it's going to pull that blade right off the track, and if it's spinning, it's going to pull it off the wheel as well, and it can come flying out or it can break. So we never want to back out of a cut while the blade is in motion. If we need to back out of a cut, we're going to stop and wait for the blade to come to a dead stop, and then we're going to back out of it. So remember, we said that the thickness of the blade is directly related to the radius that it can cut. So this 1/4 inch blade cannot cut this tight of a curve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to make a series of what are called relief cuts. These are cuts that are going to pop little pieces out and allow me to make that cut a little bit better. So here we go. So you can hear the blade is starting to bind a little bit, so I know I need to set a relief cut, so I'm going to stop the saw, and I'm going to make a relief cut here. On the scrapwood side, the piece that I don't want to keep, and I'm going to make a cut that connects. That's going to allow the back of my blade to move. There it is, binding again. So we'll go ahead and make a relief cut to there. Now I've got this scrap here. I need to remove this. I don't want my finger going into the blade, so I'm gonna remove it with my push stick or with my material. For my straight cut here, I'm gonna use the fence right about there, and I can use a push stick for this one as well. So the bandsaw has the capability of curved cuts and straight cuts. Last but certainly not least, before you leave a bandsaw, one, you need to make sure that it is no longer spinning in there, even if you've turned it off. Sometimes they take some time to wind down, so you need to make sure you wait with the machine until it is at a complete and dead stop. We also need to pick up our scrap. So you don't want to leave wood chunks littered around because someone's going to step on them. That can make them trip and cut themselves on the bandsaw. It's just not a part of a safe, clean shop environment. So we're going to clean up our area. We're going to remove any wood chips that are still on the table. If there's a bunch of sawdust, we'll blow that off, clean it off, brush it off. Some way we're going to clean that up, okay? If you break a blade in a shop class, you should tell the instructor. If you realize that it is burning your wood rather than cutting it, you should let the instructor know, because that means the blade's getting dull, and dull tools cause accidents. So let your instructor know so they can get it fixed up and we don't have any issues.
Hey, I hope this was helpful and you got value out of it. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and we'll see you next time.